Please marry my mother, uncle. She's all I have left, the little girl begged. When he saw her mother, a tear fell from his eye. Hi, my beautiful and loyal family. Welcome back to Mr. Peter Stories. Before we begin, I want you to pause and take this in. You are loved here more than you'll ever understand. Not for your views, not for your likes, but for your heart, your presence, your loyalty. You've carried me through storms, and I promise I will carry you too. To my precious new family members, welcome to a home built on real love. You are not here by mistake. This place was waiting for you. And to those who've stood by me through every chapter, your love is the light that guides everything I do. Please don't let your silence break this bond. Your comments, your "I am with you," your presence, it keeps this heart beating. But lately, I've felt something missing. Why do I need to remind you to like and comment? Why should love beg for expression? If I give you my soul through these stories, can I not ask for a little spark in return? Now let me lift a prayer for you, with all the love I have. May every tear you cried be turned into joy. May every door that closed be followed by one wide open. May peace fill your home, and love chase every shadow away. And may the ones who've been silent find their voice again, with me. Comment, "I am with you, so I know I still have your hand." Let's not just be a channel. Let's be a legacy of love, louder than silence, stronger than time. Now, breathe in, feel my love, and let's begin today's story together as one. Dom Barton, a successful 35-year-old architect, pulled into the gravel parking lot of Ruby's Diner as rain drummed against his windshield. 10 years had passed since he'd set foot in Millbrook, the small town where he'd grown up, fallen in love for the first time, and learned what heartbreak truly meant. He hadn't planned to stop here. His meeting with the mayor about the new community center project wasn't until tomorrow. But something about the familiar red neon sign flickering through the storm had drawn him in like a magnetic force. Dom sat in his car for a moment, watching rain create rivers down the windshield, distorting his view of the diner that looked exactly as it had when he was 17. Ruby's Diner had been where teenagers came after football games, where first dates happened over chocolate milkshakes, and where he'd spent countless hours with her, planning their future together. He shook his head, trying to dispel memories that threatened to surface. Some doors were better left closed. The bell above the entrance chimed as Dom pushed through the glass door, and the familiar smell of coffee and apple pie hit him like a warm embrace. The red vinyl booths were exactly the same. The checkered floor showed the same worn patterns, and even the jukebox in the corner still stood silent, probably broken since 1995. A few locals looked up from their newspapers and coffee cups, their curious glances lingering on his expensive suit and polished shoes. He was clearly not from around here anymore. Dom chose a booth by the window, the same one where he used to sit and watch cars pull up, always hoping to catch a glimpse of warm, brown eyes and a smile that could light up his world. He ordered black coffee from a waitress who looked young enough to be in high school, probably Ruby's granddaughter, and pulled out his phone to review architectural plans for tomorrow's presentation. The warmth of the diner and steady rhythm of rain against the windows created a cocoon of nostalgia that made it hard to concentrate on blueprints and budget proposals. Dom found himself staring out at the empty parking lot, remembering summer nights when it had been full of teenagers' cars and laughter echoing through warm air. He'd been happy then, stupidly and completely happy, believing that love conquered. All in that promises made at 17 lasted forever. "Excuse me, mister?" The small voice broke through his reverie, and Dom looked down to see a little girl standing beside his table. She couldn't have been more than 7 years old, with big brown eyes that seemed too serious for her age, and dark curls escaping from what had probably started as neat pigtails that morning. Her yellow raincoat was soaked, and her small hands were clutched tightly together in front of her. Yes, sweetheart? Dom asked, setting down his coffee cup and giving her his full attention. Something about the way she stood there, so small and determined, reminded him of someone, though he couldn't quite place who. The little girl's bottom lip trembled slightly, and Dom noticed the tears gathering in her eyes. She took a deep breath, as if summoning all her courage, and looked directly at him. "Please marry my mother, mister." Dom's coffee cup froze halfway to his lips. Of all the things he might have expected a 7-year-old to say, that wasn't even in the realm of possibility. He set the cup down carefully, studying the little girl's earnest face. "I'm sorry. What did you say?" "Please marry my mother," she repeated more urgently this time. The tears that had been threatening now spilled over onto her cheeks. "She's so sad since we moved here last month. She keeps staring at our old photo album and crying over a picture of her and some boy by a lake. She says he was her best friend who she'll never see again, and that she made the biggest mistake of her life by losing him." Dom's heart began to beat faster. A picture by a lake. His mouth went dry as memories flooded back. Summer afternoons, spent at Miller's Lake, the old rope swing, the hidden spot behind the willow tree where they'd carved their initials into the bark. But it couldn't be. It was just a coincidence, his mind playing tricks on him. "Sweetie," he said gently, "what's your name?" "Daisy," she sniffled, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. "Daisy Walker." Walker. The name hit him like a physical blow. His vision blurred for a moment, and he gripped the edge of the table to steady himself. It couldn't be possible. Not after all these years. Not here, in this place where it all began. "Daisy, that's a beautiful name," he managed to say, his voice sounding strange to his own ears. "And your mother, what's her name?" "Wendy." "Daisy," said Hope, creeping into her voice, as if she sensed she was getting through to him. "Her name is Wendy Walker. She works here now in the kitchen. We moved into my great-grandma's house last month after she went to heaven. Mama says we needed a fresh start, but she just seems sadder here than she was before." Dom's hands were shaking now. Wendy. His Wendy. The girl who had owned his heart completely, who had disappeared from his life without explanation when they were both 17, leaving him to wonder for years what he had done wrong. "She has brown hair like mine," Daisy continued, sensing his attention. "And she's really pretty, and she makes the best chocolate chip cookies in the whole world. She used to sing me to sleep, but she doesn't do that anymore. She just sits by the window at night and looks really, really sad." "Daisy, where are you?" A voice called from the kitchen, melodic and familiar, sending chills down Dom's spine. "You're supposed to be doing your homework, not bothering the customers." "That's her," Daisy whispered conspiratorially, then raised her voice. "I'm just talking to the nice man, Mama. He seems really interesting." Dom heard footsteps approaching, and his heart hammered against his ribs. 10 years of wondering, 10 years of what-ifs and might-have-beens, and now she was here, just steps away. He wasn't ready. He would never be ready. "I'm so sorry," the voice was saying as the footsteps grew closer. "She's usually not this forward with strangers. Daisy, come away from—" The voice stopped abruptly, and Dom looked up to see her standing at the edge of his booth, a plate in her hands and shock written across every feature of her face. She was older, more beautiful somehow, with the same chocolate brown eyes that had haunted his dreams for a decade. Her dark hair was longer now, pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore a simple blue dress beneath a white apron that read "Ruby's Diner" in faded red letters. The plate slipped from her hands and shattered against the floor, sending fragments of ceramic scattering across the checkered tiles. The sound seemed to echo in the sudden silence that had fallen over the diner, but neither of them moved to clean it up. "Dom?" she whispered, his name barely audible. "Hello, Wendy," he said softly, drinking in the sight of her face. Older, but still achingly familiar. It's been a long time. For a moment the years melted away, and they were 17 again, sitting in this same booth, making plans for a future they both believed was guaranteed. Then reality crashed back, and Wendy's face crumpled with emotion. "I have to go," she said quickly, backing away from the table. "Daisy, come on. We need to get home." "But Mama," Daisy protested, looking back and forth between her mother and Dom with confusion and growing excitement. "I think this might be him, the boy from the picture." Wendy's face went pale, and she grabbed Daisy's hand. "We're leaving, now." "Wendy, wait!" Dom called, standing up from the booth. "Please, we need to talk." She paused at the door, her hand on the handle, and looked back at him with eyes full of pain and regret. "I can't," she said simply. "I just can't." And then she was gone, pulling Daisy out into the rain, leaving Dom standing alone in the diner with the curious stares of the other customers and the sound of his own heart breaking all over again. But this time, he wasn't 17 and helpless. This time, he wasn't going to let her disappear without answers. This time, he was going to fight for her. Chapter 2. The Woman Who Got Away. Dom stood frozen in the diner for several minutes after Wendy and Daisy disappeared into the storm, his mind reeling from the impossibility of what had just happened. The other customers had returned to their conversations and newspapers, but he could feel their curious glances and whispered speculation about the stranger in the expensive suit who had just caused such a scene. Ruby herself, now in her 70s, but still manning the register with sharp eyes that had witnessed decades of small-town drama, approached his table with a broom and dustpan to clean up the broken plate. "That's Wendy Walker," she said matter-of-factly, sweeping up the ceramic shards. "Moved back about a month ago with her little girl. Inherited her grandmother's place on Maple Street. Good woman, hard worker, but she's got sadness in her eyes. The kind that comes from losing something important." Dom pulled out his wallet and left money on the table, including enough to cover the broken plate and a generous tip. "Ruby, do you remember me? Dom Barton. I used to come in here during high school." Ruby straightened up, studying his face with the careful attention of someone who had been watching teenagers fall in love and break each other's hearts for 50 years. Recognition dawned slowly in her eyes. "Well, I'll be damned," she said softly. "Little Dominic Barton. You grew up nice, boy. Real nice. Heard you became some hotshot architect in the city." "Something like that," Dom said, his mind still focused on the woman who had just walked out of his life for the second time. "Ruby, Wendy and we knew each other before, a long time ago." Ruby nodded knowingly. "I figured as much, from the way you both looked like you'd seen ghosts. She's been coming in here since she moved back. And every time she looks around this place, she gets that same expression you had on your face when you walked in tonight, like she's looking for something that ain't there anymore. Did she say anything about the past? About why she came back?" Ruby leaned on her broom, considering. "She doesn't talk much about personal things, but I know she inherited Clara Thompson's house. That was her grandmother. Clara passed last winter, left everything to Wendy. House had been sitting empty for months before Wendy showed up with the little one, Clara Thompson." Dom remembered her. A kind woman who had raised Wendy after her parents died in a car accident when Wendy was 12. He and Wendy had spent countless afternoons at Clara's house, doing homework at the kitchen table while the smell of fresh cookies filled the air. "The little girl," Dom said carefully. "Daisy, how long has it been just the two of them?" Ruby's expression softened. "From what I can tell, the child's father passed some years back. Wendy doesn't say much about it, but you can see she's been through something hard. That little girl is her whole world." Dom nodded, a plan beginning to form in his mind. "Ruby, I need a favor. I'm going to be in town for the next few days on business. If Wendy asks about me, could you tell her that I'm here on business, nothing more?" Ruby raised an eyebrow. "You planning on causing that girl more heartache, Dom Barton?" "Just the opposite," Dom said quietly. I'm planning on fixing some old mistakes if she'll let me. The next morning, Dom sat in his rental car outside the small white house on Maple Street, trying to gather the courage to walk up to the front door. He'd barely slept, his mind churning with memories and questions that had no answers. The house looked exactly as he remembered it, a classic Victorian with a wraparound porch and flower boxes that Clara Thompson had always kept overflowing with petunias and marigolds. Now the boxes were empty, waiting for spring. A yellow school bus rumbled down the street and stopped in front of the house. Dom watched as Daisy emerged from the front door, a small backpack bouncing on her shoulders. She looked both ways carefully before crossing the street to the bus, and Dom couldn't help but smile at the serious expression on her young face. As the bus pulled away, the front door opened again, and Wendy stepped onto the porch. She was dressed in jeans and a soft blue sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders. Even from this distance, Dom could see the exhaustion in her posture, the weight of whatever burden she carried. She walked to the mailbox at the end of the driveway, and Dom made his decision. He got out of the car and approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. "Wendy." She turned at the sound of his voice, and he saw the moment she recognized him. The flash of pain followed quickly by something that might have been relief. "I wondered if you'd come," she said quietly, clutching the mail to her chest like a shield. "We need to talk," Dom said, stopping a few feet away from her. Up close, he could see the faint lines around her eyes that hadn't been there when they were teenagers, the way her shoulders seemed to carry invisible weight. 15 years, Wendy. Don't I deserve an explanation? Wendy looked down at the mail in her hands, and Dom noticed her fingers trembling slightly. "You deserve a lot more than that," she said so softly he almost didn't hear her. "But I don't know if I can give it to you." "Try," he said simply. She looked up at him then, and he saw tears gathering in her eyes. "Not here, not like this. If we're going to do this, we should do it right. Meet me tonight at sunset, you know where." Dom's heart clenched. He knew exactly where she meant, their place by Miller's Lake, behind the old willow tree where they'd spent so many evenings talking about their dreams and planning their future together. "Will you be there?" he asked. "I'll be there," she promised, then added more quietly, "I owe you that much." The day passed with agonizing slowness. Dom went through the motions of his scheduled meeting with the mayor about the community center, the project, presenting his preliminary designs and discussing timelines and budgets. But his mind was elsewhere, lost in memories of a 17-year-old girl with sparkling eyes and a laugh that could chase away any shadow. He drove past the high school where they'd met, where Wendy had been the quiet girl in AP English, who wrote poetry that made his heart ache with its beauty. He remembered the first time he'd gotten up the courage to ask her to study together, how she'd looked surprised that someone like him, the star quarterback with college scouts already calling, would notice someone like her, but he had noticed. God, how he had noticed. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was thinking, the way she bit her lower lip when she was concentrating on a difficult problem, the way her whole face lit up when she smiled, transforming her from pretty to absolutely breathtaking. They'd been inseparable after that first study session. Dom had discovered that beneath Wendy's quiet exterior was a mind that challenged him, a sense of humor that caught him off guard, and a heart so pure and generous it humbled him. She'd made him want to be better than he was, to deserve the love she offered so freely. He'd been planning to propose after graduation. He'd had it all figured out. They'd go to college together, get married after they finished their degrees, build a life filled with the kind of love that lasted forever. He'd even bought a ring with money he'd saved from his part-time job at the hardware store, and then one day she was simply gone. No explanation, no goodbye, no forwarding address. Just empty space where the most important person in his world used to be. As the sun began to set, Dom made his way to Miller's Lake. The path through the woods was overgrown now, but his feet remembered the way. He emerged from the trees to find the lake exactly as he'd left it, peaceful and mirror-still, reflecting the orange and pink sky like a painting. The old willow tree still stood at the water's edge, its branches drooping into the water like fingers trailing in a lazy current. Behind it, hidden from view of the main path, was the small clearing where he and Wendy had spent countless hours dreaming about their future. She was already there when he arrived, sitting on the fallen log they'd claimed as their spot. All those years ago, she'd changed into a simple white dress that made her look younger, more like the girl he remembered. Her hair was loose, catching the last rays of sunlight like spun gold. "You came," she said without looking up. "Did you think I wouldn't?" Dom asked, settling onto the log beside her, careful to leave space between them. "I hoped you would, and I hoped you wouldn't." She finally looked at him, and he saw the fear in her eyes. "I've imagined this conversation 1,000 times over. The years. In my head, I always knew exactly what to say to make you understand. But now that you're here, just tell me the truth," Dom said gently. "Start with why you left." Wendy took a shaky breath and looked out over the water. "It happened so fast," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "One day we were making plans for prom, for college, for forever. The next day everything fell apart." She turned to face him fully, and Dom saw the pain that had been hidden beneath her composed exterior. Grandma Clara had a stroke. Massive. Devastating. The doctor said if she survived at all, she'd need full-time care for the rest of her life. There was no one else, Dom. No other family. No money for professional care. I had to choose between staying here with you and taking care of the woman who raised me after my parents died. Dom felt the first crack in the wall of hurt and anger he'd built around the memory of her leaving. "Why didn't you tell me? We could have figured something out together." "With what?" Wendy asked, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. "We were 17 years old, with no money and no resources. I couldn't ask you to give up your scholarship, your future, to help me take care of my grandmother in a city 800 miles away. And I couldn't leave her to die alone." The truth hit Dom like a physical blow. All these years, he'd assumed she'd left because she'd stopped loving him, because their plans for the future had scared her, because he hadn't been enough to make her stay. He'd never imagined that she'd left to take care of someone she loved, sacrificing her own happiness for duty and loyalty. "I wrote you letters," Wendy continued, her voice breaking. "So many letters, but I never had money for stamps, and by the time I could afford to call, your family had moved away. I tried to find you through mutual friends, but everyone scattered. After graduation, it was like you disappeared from the earth." Dom reached out and took her hand, the same small hand he'd held through movies and football games and quiet moments by this very lake. "I looked for you too," he said quietly. "For years, I hired private investigators. I searched social media. I called every Clara Thompson in the country. I never stopped hoping I'd find you." They sat in silence for a moment, watching the last light fade from the sky and the first stars appear. The weight of 15 years of misunderstanding hung between them, heavy with lost time and missed opportunities. "I'm sorry," Wendy whispered. "I'm so sorry for the pain I caused you. If I could go back and do it differently." "We can't go back," Dom said, squeezing her hand gently. "But maybe we can go forward. Tell me about Daisy. Tell me about your life." And as the moon rose over Miller's Lake, Wendy began to tell him about the 15 years they'd lost, and Dom began to hope that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late for them after all. Chapter 3. Why She Left. The moonlight cast silver patterns on the water as Wendy's story unfolded, each word carving deeper into 15 years of silence that had stood between them. Dom listened without interrupting, watching emotions play across her face as she relived memories that had clearly caused her immense pain. "The stroke happened on a Tuesday," Wendy said, her voice steady now, as if she'd rehearsed this story countless times in her mind. "I was in calculus class, thinking about what dress I wanted for prom. Then Mrs. Patterson came to get me. There was an emergency, and I needed to come to the office immediately." She paused, picking up a smooth stone from the ground and turning it over in her hands. "I knew something was terribly wrong the moment I saw the principal's face. They drove me to the hospital, but by the time I got there, Grandma Clara was already unconscious. The doctors said it was the worst kind of stroke. Massive. Damage to the left side of her brain. They weren't even sure she'd wake up." Dom felt his chest tighten as he imagined 17-year-old Wendy sitting alone in a hospital waiting room, facing the possibility of losing the only family she had left. "She was in a coma for 6 days, Wendy continued. "I barely left the hospital. I remember you coming to see me, bringing me coffee and those terrible vending machine sandwiches. You held my hand and told me everything would be okay." "I remember," Dom said softly. He remembered feeling helpless, wanting to take away her pain, but not knowing how. He'd been so young, so naive about the weight of real tragedy. When she finally woke up, the left side of her body was completely paralyzed. She couldn't speak, couldn't feed herself, couldn't do any of the basic things that make life possible. The doctors said she'd need round-the-clock care, probably for the rest of her life. And they said if we wanted her to have any chance at recovery, we needed to get her to a specialized rehabilitation facility. Wendy's voice cracked slightly, and she took a deep breath before continuing. "The only facility that had an opening was in Phoenix, 800 miles away from everything I'd ever known." The social worker sat me down and explained my options. I could become Clara's legal guardian and move with her, or I could let the state take over her care and place her in whatever facility had an opening. "But you were still a minor yourself," Dom said, pieces of the puzzle finally clicking into place. "How could you become her legal guardian? There was paperwork, legal stuff that went over my head at the time. Clara had made provisions in her will, designating me as her heir and giving me the legal authority to make decisions about her care if something happened to her. I think she always knew that her age and health made something like this a possibility." Dom could picture it now. Wendy, barely 18, faced with an impossible choice between her own future and the woman who had raised her with such love and devotion. "The facility in Phoenix was expensive," Wendy continued. "Even with insurance, the costs were staggering. I had to sell Clara's house here in Millbrook just to cover the first year of her care. We moved into a tiny apartment near the rehabilitation center, and I got my GED instead of finishing high school with our class." "You never graduated with us," Dom said, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. All this time, he'd imagined her walking across the stage at graduation, celebrating with friends, moving on with her life while he was left behind. The reality was so much harder and more complicated. "I worked 3 jobs, Wendy said, a note of pride creeping into her voice despite the sadness of the story. Waitressing at a diner during the day, cleaning offices at night, and doing data entry work from home whenever I could squeeze it in." Clara was making progress, slow but progress. She regained some speech, some movement in her right hand. The therapist said it was remarkable that having someone who loved her nearby was making all the difference. Dom found himself admiring the strength it must have taken for 18-year-old Wendy to shoulder such enormous responsibility. The girl he'd fallen in love with had possessed kindness and determination, but he'd never imagined she'd be tested by circumstances that would challenge most adults. "I wrote you letters," Wendy said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "So many letters. I started them the day after we left Millbrook, and I kept writing them for years. I told you about Clara's progress, about my jobs, about how much I missed you. I described the desert sunsets and the way the mountains looked in the morning light. I wrote about hoping you'd understand why I had to leave, about praying you'd wait for me, even though I had no idea when or if I'd ever be able to come back. Why didn't you send them? Dom asked, though he was beginning to understand. Money, at first. Stamps cost money, and long-distance phone calls were expensive. Every penny I had went to Clara's care or keeping us fed and housed. But as time went on, it became more complicated than that. Wendy set the stone down and looked directly at him. I found out through mutual friends that your family had moved to California. Your father got that promotion with the aerospace company, and you were going to Stanford on that football scholarship. Dom nodded. The scholarship had been his ticket to a future he'd always dreamed of. But leaving Millbrook had felt like leaving part of his soul behind. I was happy for you, Wendy said, and Dom could hear the sincerity in her voice. Proud, but also heartbroken. You were living the life we'd planned together, just without me. And I was trapped in a situation that had no clear end in sight. Clara was improving, but slowly. The doctors couldn't give me any timeline for how long her recovery might take, or even if she'd ever be independent enough for me to leave. I would have waited, Dom said fiercely. If I'd known what you were going through, I would have waited forever. Wendy's smile was sad, but grateful. I know you think that now, but Dom, we were so young. You had your whole life ahead of you. College, your career, opportunities that might never come again. What kind of person would I have been if I'd asked you to put your life on hold indefinitely for someone who might never be able to give you the future you deserved? The selflessness of her sacrifice took Dom's breath away. She'd given up everything. Her education, her future, her first love, to care for someone who needed her, and then she'd refused to let him sacrifice his opportunities for her sake. What happened to Clara? Dom asked gently. Wendy's expression softened with a mixture of grief and gratitude. She lived for 12 more years after her stroke. 12 years that I'll never regret, despite everything they cost us. She never fully recovered, but she had quality of life. She could speak well enough to tell me stories about her childhood, about my mother when she was young. She could feed herself, read books, enjoy television shows. She even learned to paint with her right hand, these beautiful watercolors of desert landscapes. She was lucky to have you, Dom said. I was lucky to have her, Wendy corrected. She was the closest thing to a mother I'd ever really known, and those 12 years gave me time to say goodbye properly, time to tell her all the things I needed her to know. When she passed last winter, it was peaceful. She died in her sleep, and her last words to me were that she was proud of the woman I'd become, and that she wanted me to go home to Millbrook and find my happiness again. Dom felt his throat tighten with emotion. And Daisy. Wendy's entire demeanor changed when she spoke her daughter's name, her face lighting up with the fierce, protective love that only a mother could understand. Daisy is the greatest gift I never knew I needed. Her father. Wendy paused, and Dom saw a flicker of pain cross her features. Her father was a good man who loved us both very much. He died when she was 2, in an accident. It's been just the 2 of us ever since. Dom wanted to ask more about Daisy's father, but something in Wendy's expression warned him that this was still too painful a subject to explore fully. There would be time for those questions later, he hoped. She's remarkable, Dom said instead. Daisy, I mean, the way she approached me yesterday took real courage. Wendy laughed, a sound that was both joyful and slightly exasperated. She's always been like that, fearless, determined, convinced she can fix any problem with enough persistence. She's been asking me about you since the day we moved back here. About me specifically, about the boy in the pictures from my high school albums. I kept a few photo albums from before we left Millbrook. Pictures of you and me at school events, prom photos, pictures from our time here at the lake. Daisy found them while we were unpacking and became obsessed with the story behind them. She kept asking why I looked so happy in those pictures and why I didn't look that happy anymore. Dom's heart ached at the thought of little Daisy looking at photographs of her mother's lost love, trying to understand the sadness that had shadowed Wendy's life. When we moved into Clara's house, Wendy continued, Daisy found more pictures that Clara had kept. Pictures of you and me as children, playing in Clara's backyard, pictures from birthday parties and school functions. She pieced together that the boy in all these pictures was someone very important to me, someone I'd lost. And in her 7-year-old logic, she decided that if she could find you and convince you to marry me, she could fix whatever was broken and make me happy again. Smart kid, Dom said with a smile. How did she know where to find me? She didn't exactly, but yesterday when we went to Ruby's for lunch, she saw you through the window before we went inside. She recognized you from the pictures immediately. Apparently, you haven't changed as much as you think you have. She told me later that she knew right away that you were the boy who could make Mama smile like she did in the old pictures. Dom was quiet for a moment, processing everything Wendy had told him. 15 years of questions had been answered. 15 years of hurt and confusion finally explained. But understanding the past didn't automatically heal the wounds it had left behind. Wendy, he said finally, I need you to know that I don't blame you for any of it. You made the right choice, the only choice you could make. I wish I could have been there to help you through it. I wish that too, she said softly. Every single day for 15 years I wish that. They sat in comfortable silence. For a while, listening to the gentle lap of water against the shore and the soft rustle of wind through the willow branches. The moon was high now, casting everything in silver light that made the familiar landscape look magical and new. So what happens now? Wendy asked eventually. Dom turned to look at her, this woman who had shaped his heart so completely when they were young, who had never really left his thoughts despite the years and distance that had separated them. Now, he said, reaching for her hand, we figure out if 15 years was long enough for us to become the people we were meant to be, and if we're brave enough to find out whether what we had then was strong enough to build something new on now. Wendy's fingers intertwined with his, and for the first time in 15 years, Dom felt like he was exactly where he belonged. Chapter 4. A Matchmaker Named Daisy. The next morning, Dom woke up in his hotel room with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. His conversation with Wendy had lifted a weight from his shoulders that he'd been carrying for so long he'd forgotten what it felt like to breathe freely. They'd agreed to take things slowly, to get to know each other again as the adults they'd become, rather than rushing back into the intensity of their teenage romance. But Dom hadn't counted on having a 7-year-old accomplice with her own agenda. He was reviewing architectural plans over breakfast in the hotel restaurant when his phone rang. The caller ID showed Ruby's diner. Hello, Mr. Dom? The voice was unmistakably Daisy's, though she was trying to whisper and sound grown up. This is Daisy Walker. Ruby gave me your number from your business card. Dom smiled despite himself. Hello, Daisy. Is everything okay? Where's your mother? She's in the shower. I need your help with something really important. Can you come to our house? It's an emergency. Dom's amusement quickly turned to concern. What kind of emergency? Should I call 911? No, nothing. Like that, Daisy said quickly. It's a different kind of emergency. A breakfast emergency. Mama was going to make me pancakes, but we don't have any syrup. And the store doesn't open until 9, and I have to leave for school at 8:15. And she's really sad because she thinks she's failing at being a good mom, and I thought maybe you could bring some syrup and save the day. Dom glanced at his watch. It was 7:30, which meant Daisy had approximately 45 minutes to orchestrate whatever plan she was hatching. The kid was definitely more sophisticated than he'd initially realized. "Daisy," he said carefully, "does your mother know you're calling me?" "Not exactly," Daisy admitted. "But she said last night that you were going to be friends again, and friends help each other out, right? Plus, you probably eat breakfast anyway, so you might as well eat it with us instead of alone in your boring hotel room." Dom found himself charmed by her logic, even as he recognized the obvious manipulation. "And you think bringing syrup will make your mother less sad?" "I think," Daisy said with the confidence of someone who had been thinking about this for weeks, "that having you around makes Mama smile differently. And if syrup gets you to come over, then syrup is really important." Dom made his decision. "What kind of syrup does your mother like?" "The real kind, made from trees, not the fake stuff that tastes like plastic. Maple syrup, got it. Text me your address." "I can't text yet, but I can spell it out for you." 20 minutes later, Dom stood on the front porch of Clara Thompson's house with a bottle of Vermont maple syrup and a bouquet of daisies he'd picked up from the hotel's gift shop. The house looked better in daylight. The paint was fresh, the yard was neat, and someone had planted mums in the flower boxes to add splashes of orange and yellow against the white siding. Daisy opened the door before he could knock, wearing a school uniform of navy blue and white plaid with her hair in 2 neat braids. "You came," she said with genuine delight, "and you brought flowers. Mama loves daisies. That's why she named me Daisy." "Is your mother okay with this visit?" Dom asked, suddenly wondering if he was overstepping boundaries. "She will be," Daisy said confidently, taking his hand and pulling him into the house. "Mama, the pancake hero is here." The interior of the house was exactly as Dom remembered it, from his teenage years, but warmer somehow. Clara's doilies and china cabinet were still there, but they'd been joined by colourful children's artwork on the refrigerator, photographs of Daisy at various ages, and the kind of comfortable clutter that came from 2 people making a house into a home. Wendy appeared in the kitchen doorway, her hair still damp from the shower, wearing jeans and a soft yellow sweater that made her skin glow. She looked beautiful and slightly embarrassed. "I am so sorry," she said, shooting a meaningful look at Daisy. "Someone apparently decided to take matters into her own hands this morning." "I told him about the syrup emergency," Daisy explained, as if this justified everything. "And look, he brought flowers too. I think he likes you, Mama." Dom felt heat rise in his cheeks, feeling suddenly like a teenager again. "I hope I'm not intruding." Daisy made it sound like there was a genuine crisis. "There is a genuine crisis," Daisy insisted. "Mama was about to cry over the syrup situation, and crying before breakfast ruins the whole day. Everyone knows that." Wendy covered her face with her hands, but Dom could see she was trying not to laugh. "Daisy Margaret Walker, we are going to have a serious conversation about appropriate telephone behavior after school today." "But it worked," Daisy pointed out pragmatically. "Mr. Dom is here, you're not crying anymore, and we have syrup. I'd call that a very successful emergency response." Dom held up the bottle of maple syrup. "For what it's worth, I was happy to help, and I haven't had homemade pancakes in years." Wendy looked at him for a long moment, and Dom saw something in her expression soften. "Well, since you're here, you might as well stay." Daisy set another place at the table and thanked Mr. Dom properly for bringing the syrup. Daisy threw her arms around Dom's waist in an enthusiastic hug. "Thank you for saving breakfast, Mr. Dom. You're the best emergency pancake syrup provider ever." As they sat down to eat, Dom found himself drawn into the easy rhythm of their morning routine. Daisy chattered about her upcoming school presentation on butterflies, describing in elaborate detail the poster board she was creating and the butterfly costume she planned to wear. Wendy interjected with gentle reminders about finishing her math homework and remembering to return her library books. It felt natural and right in a way that surprised Dom. He'd never been around children much, but Daisy's enthusiasm was infectious, and watching Wendy interact with her daughter revealed a side of her he'd never seen before. Patient, nurturing, but also playful and silly when the moment called for it. "Mr. Dom," Daisy said as she cut her pancakes into precise triangles, "do you have any kids?" "Daisy," Wendy warned gently. "It's okay," Dom said. "No, I don't have any children." "Are you married?" "Daisy." "No, I'm not married," Dom answered honestly. Daisy considered this information with the seriousness of a Supreme Court justice. "That's good, because if you were married, my plan wouldn't work." "What plan?" Dom and Wendy asked simultaneously. "My plan to convince you to marry Mama and be my new dad," Daisy said matter-of-factly, as if this were the most obvious thing in the world. "I've been thinking about it a lot, and I've decided you'd be perfect for our family." Wendy looked mortified. "Daisy, you can't just decide that people should get married. It doesn't work that way." "Why not?" Daisy asked. "You like him, right? You smiled more at breakfast this morning than you have since we moved here. And he brought flowers and emergency syrup, which shows he's good at taking care of people. Plus, he's really tall, so he could reach the things on the high shelves and fix the ceiling fan in my bedroom that makes the scary noise." Dom tried to hide his amusement at being evaluated based on his shelf-reaching abilities. "That's very practical thinking, Daisy." "I'm a very practical person," Daisy agreed. "Mama says I get that from my father. He was a soldier, and soldiers have to be practical about everything." Dom glanced at Wendy and saw pain flicker across her features at the mention of Daisy's father. It was clearly still a difficult subject, one that carried more weight than a 7-year-old could understand. "Your father sounds like he was a good man," Dom said carefully. "He was the best," Daisy said, with the absolute certainty of a child's love. "Mama has pictures of him, and she tells me stories about how brave and strong he was. But he went to heaven when I was really little, so I don't remember him very much. That's why I think it would be okay if you wanted to be my dad now. I mean, if you wanted to, and if Mama said yes." The innocent honesty of her words hit Dom squarely in the chest. This little girl was looking for a father figure, someone to fill the empty space left by a man who had died too young. The responsibility of that trust was both terrifying and deeply moving. "Daisy," Wendy said gently, "Dom is our friend. We're just getting to know each other again after being apart for a long time. Marriage is something that happens between adults who love each other very much, and it takes time for that kind of love to grow. But you already loved each other before," Daisy pointed out with 7-year-old logic. "I saw the pictures. You looked really, really happy together, so couldn't you just love each other again?" Dom caught Wendy's eye across the table and saw his own emotions reflected there: hope, fear, and the dawning realization that this conversation was about much more than a child's wishful thinking. "It's complicated, sweetheart," Wendy said softly. "Everything's complicated with grown-ups," Daisy sighed dramatically. "But I still think you should give Mr. Dom a chance. Maybe you could go on dates and see if you still like each other. I could help. I know lots of things about dating from watching movies with Mama." "Oh, this should be interesting," Wendy said, clearly dreading whatever dating advice was about to emerge from her 7-year-old. "First, you should go to dinner somewhere fancy where they bring you bread," Daisy began, counting on her fingers. "Then you should go to a movie, but not a scary one because Mama doesn't like scary stuff. Then you should go dancing because in the movies, people always fall in love when they dance. And then Mr. Dom should bring you flowers and tell you you're pretty, and then you should decide if you want to get married." Dom found himself genuinely considering Daisy's dating timeline. "That sounds like a very thorough plan." "I've been thinking about it for weeks," Daisy said proudly. "Ever since we moved here and Mama started looking sad all the time. I knew she needed someone special to make her happy again, but I didn't know how to find the right person." And then yesterday, you just appeared in the diner like magic, and I knew you were the answer to my prayers." The school bus honked outside, interrupting Daisy's romantic planning session. She jumped up from the table and grabbed her backpack, then turned back to Dom with a serious expression. "Mr. Dom, will you think about my plan? You don't have to decide today, but will you at least consider it?" Dom looked at this earnest little girl who had somehow decided he was the solution to her family's problems, then at Wendy, who was watching. The interaction with a mixture of embarrassment and something that might have been hope. "I'll think about it," he promised. Daisy beamed and gave him another quick hug before racing out to catch the bus. The house suddenly felt very quiet, with just Dom and Wendy sitting at the breakfast table, surrounded by the remnants of their meal. "I'm so sorry about that," Wendy said, starting to clear the plates. "She's been fixated on this idea ever since she figured out who you were. I've tried to explain that real life doesn't work like fairy tales, but maybe sometimes it does," Dom said quietly, standing to help her clean up. "Maybe sometimes little girls who believe in magic know something the rest of us have forgotten." Wendy paused in her dish gathering and looked at him with those chocolate brown eyes that had haunted his dreams for 15 years. "Dom, I don't want you to feel pressured by anything Daisy said. She's just a child who wants her mother to be happy, and she doesn't understand how complicated adult relationships can be." "What if they don't have to be complicated?" Dom asked, moving closer to her. "What if we started simple? Dinner, like Daisy suggested. Just two old friends catching up, seeing if there's anything left of what we used to have." Wendy was quiet for a long moment, and Dom could see her internal struggle playing out across her features. Finally she smiled, the first truly happy smile he'd seen from her since he'd arrived in Millbrook. "I'd like that," she said softly. "I'd like that very much." And as Dom helped her finish cleaning up the breakfast dishes, he found himself thinking that maybe Daisy's romantic timeline wasn't so far-fetched after all. Maybe sometimes the best plans were the ones made by 7-year-olds who still believed in happy endings. Chapter 5. Falling Again. Over the next 2 weeks, Dom found excuses to extend his stay in Millbrook. What had started as a 3-day business trip for the community center project had somehow stretched into an indefinite residency at the Millbrook Inn, much to the delight of Mrs. Henderson, the elderly proprietor who was thrilled to have a long-term guest. The truth was, Dom couldn't bring himself to leave. Not when Wendy was finally smiling again, not when Daisy had appointed herself his official tour guide to her mother's heart. And certainly not when every day brought new discoveries about the woman Wendy had become and the family she'd built with her remarkable daughter. Their first official date had been everything Daisy had prescribed, and more. Dom had taken Wendy to Chez Laurent, the only upscale restaurant within 30 miles, where they'd lingered over candlelight and wine, talking until the staff began stacking chairs around them. They discovered that despite 15 years apart, they still shared the same sense of humor, the same dreams about making the world a little better through their work, and the same ability to lose track of time when they were together. But it was the unofficial moments that were stealing Dom's heart all over again. The way Wendy hummed while she cooked dinner, the same unconscious melody she'd hummed as a teenager, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when concentrating, a gesture so familiar it made his chest ache with recognition, the way she listened, truly listened, when he talked about his work, his dreams, his fears about whether he'd wasted too many years building walls around his heart. And then there was Daisy, who had taken to Dom with an enthusiasm that was both heartwarming and slightly overwhelming. She'd appointed him as her official homework helper, her bike-riding instructor, and her partner in the elaborate treasure hunts she created around her grandmother's house. Watching Wendy watch him with her daughter, seeing the soft look that crossed her face when Daisy threw her arms around his neck or demanded that he read just one more bedtime story, made Dom realize he wanted this life more than he'd ever wanted anything. 2 weeks after his arrival, Dom stood on Clara's front porch, with a toolbox in one hand and coffee in the other, having been summoned by Daisy for what she'd described as an urgent household emergency requiring immediate masculine intervention. Wendy opened the door, wearing paint-splattered overalls and a bandana tied around her hair, looking like a beautiful disaster. "Please tell me she didn't call you about the ceiling fan again," she said, stepping aside to let him in. "Actually, today's crisis involves a loose step on the front porch, a squeaky hinge on the garden gate, and apparently something wrong with the garbage disposal that's making apocalyptic noises," Dom said, consulting the detailed list Daisy had dictated to him over the phone. "I'm also supposed to assess the structural integrity of her treehouse and determine whether it's safe for the tea party she's planning for Monday." Wendy laughed, a sound that never failed to send warmth spreading through Dom's chest. "She's been making that list for days, adding items every time she notices something that needs fixing. I think she's under the impression that having a man around means everything in the house will magically repair itself." "I don't mind," Dom said, and he realized he truly didn't. There was something deeply satisfying about being needed, about having his skills put to use for the two people who were rapidly becoming the center of his world. Besides, Clara's house deserves to be properly maintained. She put a lot of love into this place. They spent the morning working together on various repair projects, falling into an easy rhythm that felt like they'd been doing this for years instead of weeks. Dom fixed the porch step while Wendy painted the guest bedroom, and they met in the middle for a shared lunch of sandwiches and iced tea on the back porch. "You know," Wendy said, watching Dom secure the last screw in the garden gate hinge, "you don't have to do all this. The handyman stuff, I mean. I'm perfectly capable of hiring professionals to fix things." Dom straightened up and looked at her, noting the way the afternoon sun brought out the golden highlights in her hair. "I know you're capable. I've seen you manage things that would have broken most people, but I like doing this. I like being useful to you and Daisy." "Is that all?" Wendy asked softly. Dom set down his screwdriver and moved closer to her, close enough to see the flecks of green in her brown eyes. "You know it's not." The tension between them had been building for days, in lingering glances across the dinner table, in hands that brushed while reaching for the same dish, in conversations that started about mundane topics and somehow meandered into discussions of dreams and fears and the shape of the future they both wanted, but were afraid to name out loud. "Dom," Wendy said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I need you to understand something. Daisy and we're a package deal. If this is going somewhere, if we're really trying this, then you're not just getting involved with me, you're signing up to be a father figure to a little girl who's already lost too much." "I know," Dom said, reaching up to cup her face in his. "Anne's. I've known since that first morning when she orchestrated the pancake crisis. And Wendy, I can't think of anything I'd rather sign up for." Before she could respond, the sound of a school bus rumbling down the street announced Daisy's return from her Saturday art class. They stepped apart just as she came racing up the driveway, her backpack bouncing and her face alight with excitement. "Mr. Dom, you fixed the gate," she exclaimed, testing the newly silent hinges with obvious delight. "And the porch step doesn't wobble anymore. You're like a house-fixing superhero." "Just call me Captain Screwdriver," Dom said solemnly, making Daisy dissolve into giggles. "Did you check my treehouse yet? Because Mrs. Martinez said I could invite the whole class for a tea party if it's safe. And that would be so cool because nobody else has a treehouse in their backyard." Dom glanced at the structure in question, a charming but admittedly rickety platform built in the old oak tree that dominated the backyard. Clara had built it years ago, probably when Wendy was Daisy's age, and it was showing its age. "Let me take a look," he said, walking over to examine the wooden ladder and platform more closely. The treehouse was structurally sound, but could definitely use some reinforcement and safety improvements. "What's the verdict, Doctor?" Wendy asked, joining him beneath the tree. "It's got good bones, but it needs some updating," Dom said. "New safety railings, a few additional support beams, maybe a proper rope ladder instead of these wooden rungs. Nothing major, but definitely necessary if it's going to host tea parties." Daisy's face fell. "Does that mean no tea party?" "It means," Dom said, kneeling down to her level, "that we're going to spend next weekend making this the safest, most awesome treehouse in Millbrook. What do you say, partner? Ready for a construction project?" Daisy's expression shifted from disappointment to pure joy so quickly that Dom felt his heart do a little flip. "Really? We're going to build it together?" "We're going to rebuild it together," Dom confirmed, "but I'm going to need an assistant who knows the difference between a Phillips head screwdriver and a flathead screwdriver." "Think you're up for the job?" "I am the best assistant," Daisy declared with the confidence of someone who had never met a challenge she couldn't conquer. "Mama, did you hear? Mr. Dom and I are going to rebuild my treehouse." "I heard," Wendy said. And when Dom looked up at her, he saw something in her expression that made his pulse quicken. Trust, hope, and something deeper that he didn't dare name yet, but that sent warmth spreading through his entire body. That evening, after Daisy had finally exhausted herself with plans for the treehouse renovation and gone to bed, Dom and Wendy sat on the front porch swing that Dom had fixed that morning. The evening air was soft and sweet, with the scent of the late-blooming roses that Clara had planted along the fence, and fireflies danced in the gathering dusk. "She's getting attached to you," Wendy said quietly, her voice carrying both happiness and worry. "Is that a problem?" Dom asked. "It will be if you decide this isn't what you want," Wendy said, not looking at him. "She's already lost one father, Dom. I can't let her go through that again." Dom stopped the swing's gentle motion and turned to face her fully. "Wendy, look at me." When she finally met his eyes, he continued, "I'm not going anywhere. I know it's only been 2 weeks, and I know this is all happening fast, but I need you to understand something. I've spent 15 years trying to forget you, trying to convince myself that what we had was just teenage infatuation that would have burned out eventually anyway. But being here with you and Daisy, I realize I was lying to myself." He reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers the way they used to when they were teenagers, sitting on this same porch, making plans for a future they'd both thought was guaranteed. "I love the woman you've become," he said softly. "I love your strength, your compassion, the way you've raised Daisy to be confident and kind and fearless. I love how you hum when you cook and how you still tuck your hair behind your ear when you're thinking. I love that you kept our photos all these years, and I love that you told Daisy stories about her father so she'd know how much he loved her." Wendy's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't pull away. "And I love Daisy," Dom continued. "I love her enthusiasm and her schemes and the way she looks at the world like it's full of possibilities. I love that she thinks problems can be solved with emergency pancake syrup and that she's planning tea parties for her entire class. I love that she's decided I'm worthy of being her dad, even though I have no idea what I'm doing." "Dom," Wendy whispered, "I'm falling in love with your life, Wendy, with both of you, and if you'll let me, I want to build something real and lasting with you. Not because Daisy thinks it's a good idea, not because we have history, but because I can't imagine wanting anything more than this. Coming home to you and Daisy every day, fixing things that are broken, building tree houses, being part of your family." Wendy was quiet for a long moment, and Dom could see her internal struggle playing out across her features. Finally, she squeezed his hand and leaned closer to him on the swing. "There's something I need to tell you," she said, her voice so soft he had to strain to hear her. "About Daisy's father, about why this is so complicated for me." Dom felt his stomach clench with sudden anxiety. "Okay. His name was Jake," Wendy began, and something in the way she said the name made Dom's blood run cold. Jake Thompson. And I think you knew him. The world seemed to tilt on its axis as the pieces clicked into place. Jake Thompson. His best friend from high school, the guy who'd been like a brother to him until they'd lost touch after graduation. The Jake who'd joined the military, who'd sent him a few emails from basic training before their correspondence had faded into nothing. Jake Thompson from our graduating class? Dom asked, though he already knew the answer from the expression on Wendy's face. Yes, she whispered. And Dom, there's more. There's something about Daisy that I haven't told you. Something that changes everything. As Wendy began to explain the connection between past and present that would reshape everything Dom thought he understood about their story, he realized that falling in love again was about to become infinitely more complicated and more meaningful than either of them had imagined. Chapter 6. The truth about Daisy's father. The silence that followed Wendy's revelation stretched between them like a chasm. Dom felt as if the ground beneath the porch swing had given way, leaving him suspended in a moment that would forever divide his understanding of the past from reality. Jake Thompson, he repeated slowly, his voice sounding strange to his own ears. My Jake, the guy who helped me with calculus and taught me how to throw a curveball. Yes, Wendy whispered, tears streaming down her face now. I'm so sorry, Dom. I should have told you sooner, but I didn't know how. I didn't know if it would make you feel obligated to stay, or if it would hurt too much, or if... How? Dom asked, his mind reeling with questions. When? How did you even meet him again after high school? Wendy took a shaky breath and wiped her tears with the back of her hand. It was about 5 years ago. I was working as a nurse at the hospital near the army base in Phoenix, and Jake was brought in after a training accident. Nothing serious, a broken arm and some cuts, but he was stuck there for a few days while they monitored him for a concussion. Dom could picture it perfectly. Jake had always been clumsy as a kid, the kind of guy who could trip over his own shadow, but somehow always managed to land on his feet with a grin and a joke, ready to deflect any concern. I didn't recognize him at first, Wendy continued. He'd filled out, gotten more serious looking in his uniform, but when the nurse doing intake asked for his emergency contact information, he said he didn't really have anybody, just some old friends back home that he'd lost touch with years ago. And when he said the name of his hometown was Millbrook, I asked if he'd known a guy named Dom Barton. Dom's throat tightened. What did he say? His whole face lit up, Wendy said with a sad smile. He said you were his best friend in the whole world, the brother he'd never had. He spent the next hour telling me stories about you two. The time you got detention for trying to skateboard down the school stairs, the way you used to sneak him extra food at lunch because his family didn't have much money, how you were the only person who believed he was smart enough for college. The memories hit Dom like physical blows. He'd forgotten how much Jake had meant to him, how their friendship had been one of the most important relationships of his teenage years. They'd been inseparable until graduation pulled them in different directions. I told him I knew you, Wendy continued, that we dated in high school, and Jake got this strange look on his face and asked if I was the Wendy Miller who broke your heart when she disappeared senior year. Dom felt his chest constrict. Of course, Jake would have known about Wendy. They'd been best friends. Dom had talked about her constantly, especially after she'd left. I explained what had really happened, Wendy said. About Clara, about having to move to take care of her. Jake listened to the whole story, and when I was finished, he said something I'll never forget. He said, Dom never got over you. He pretended he did, but I could tell. Every girl he dated after that, he was looking for pieces of you in them. The truth of that statement cut deep. Dom had dated other women over the years, some seriously, but Jake was right. There had always been something missing, some essential quality that he'd found in Wendy and never found anywhere else. "How did you and Jake—" Dom started, then stopped, not sure he really wanted to know the details. "It started as friendship," Wendy said gently. "He was stuck in the hospital for 3 days, and I was working long shifts. We talked about you, about high school, about what our lives had become. He told me about his military career, about how he'd joined up because he needed direction and discipline. I told him about Clara, about Daisy's father." Dom's head snapped up. "Wait, if Jake was Daisy's father, then who were you talking about before?" "I lied," Wendy said simply. "When I told you that Daisy's father was a good man who died in an accident, that was true, but I didn't tell you it was Jake. I was scared, Dom, scared that if you knew, you'd feel obligated to help us because of your friendship with him, not because of your feelings for me." Dom stood up abruptly, pacing to the edge of the porch as he tried to process this information. Jake had been Daisy's father. Jake, who had died 5 years ago according to the timeline Wendy had given him. Jake, who had known about Dom's feelings for Wendy and had somehow ended up with the woman Dom had never stopped loving. "Tell me the rest," he said without turning around. "Jake was stationed in Phoenix for 6 months while he recovered from his injuries," Wendy continued. "We became friends first, then more. He was lonely, I was lonely, and we found comfort in each other. But Dom, you have to understand. What we had was different from what you and I shared. It was companionship, respect, deep affection. We cared about each other, but we both knew we weren't each other's great love." Dom turned back to face her. "Did he know? About us, I mean? About what we'd meant to each other?" "Yes," Wendy said, quietly. "I showed him the pictures I'd kept, told him about our plans to get married after high school, about how losing you had been the hardest thing I'd ever gone through. And Jake told me about how your heart broke when I left, how you'd driven yourself crazy trying to find me, how you'd never been the same afterward. But you still ended up together." "We found each other at the right time," Wendy said. "Two broken people who understood each other's pain. Jake had been through a difficult deployment that left him struggling with things he couldn't talk about with most people. And I was drowning in responsibility and loneliness, caring for Clara, while trying to build some kind of life for myself." Dom sat back down on the swing, his legs suddenly feeling unsteady. "When did you get married?" "We didn't," Wendy said, surprising him. "We talked about it, but Jake said he couldn't marry me knowing that we both wished we were with other people. He said it wouldn't be fair to any of us, especially not to the children we might have someday. But Daisy was conceived during Jake's last weekend before deployment," Wendy said. "It wasn't planned, but when I found out I was pregnant, Jake was over the moon. He said maybe this was the universe's way of giving us both something beautiful to love, even if we couldn't have the people we really wanted." Dom felt tears burning his eyes. That sounded exactly like something Jake would say, always looking for the silver lining, always trying to make the best of whatever situation life handed him. "He died 2 weeks before Daisy was born," Wendy continued, her voice breaking. "Training accident, helicopter crash. He never got to meet her, but he was so excited about being a father. He used to talk to my belly during our video calls, telling her about his plans for teaching her to play baseball and take her fishing and protect her from boys when she got older." "God, Wendy," Dom said, reaching for her hand. "I'm so sorry. For your loss, for Jake's loss, for all of it. I named her Daisy because it was Jake's suggestion," Wendy said through her tears. "He said if we had a daughter, he wanted to name her after something beautiful and simple and strong. He said daisies could grow anywhere, in any conditions, and still be beautiful. He wanted her to be like that." Dom thought about Daisy's personality, her resilience, her optimism, her ability to find joy in simple things, and realized that Jake had chosen well. She was exactly like a daisy, bright, tough, and beautiful. "There's something else," Wendy said hesitantly. "Something I found in Jake's things after he died. Something I think you should see." She stood up and went into the house, returning a few minutes later with a small wooden box. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, was a photograph that made Dom's breath catch in his throat. It was a picture of him and Jake from their senior year, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning at the camera after winning the state championship game. But it wasn't just the photograph that stunned him. It was what Jake had written on the back in his messy handwriting. "If anything happens to me and Wendy needs help, find Dom Barton. He's the best man I've ever known, and he loved her first. Take care of them both for me." Dom stared at the photograph and Jake's words until his vision blurred with tears. Even at the end, even knowing he might not come home, Jake had been thinking about the people he loved and trying to take care of them. "He never stopped believing you two were meant to be together," Wendy said softly. "Even when we were together, even when he loved me in his own way, he always said that if something happened to him, he hoped I'd find my way back to you." Dom looked up at Wendy. This woman who had loved his best friend, who had carried his best friend's child, who had somehow found her way back to him after years of separation. "Are you telling me this to explain why you were with Jake, or to tell me why you can't be with me?" he asked. "I'm telling you this," Wendy said, taking his hands in both of hers, "because I need you to know the truth about everything before we go any further. I need you to know that Daisy is Jake's daughter, and that loving her means honoring his memory. I need you to know that if you choose us, you're not just choosing me. You're choosing to help me raise the child of your best friend, to be the father he can't be." Dom looked at the photograph again, at Jake's familiar grin and the words he'd written with such faith in their friendship. Suddenly, everything made sense. Daisy's fearless confidence, her loyalty, her instinct to try to fix the people she loved. She was Jake's daughter in all the ways that mattered. "Wendy," he said finally, his voice rough with emotion, "I need you to listen to me very carefully. Learning that Daisy is Jake's daughter doesn't make me love her less. It makes me understand why I connected with her so quickly, why being around her felt so natural and right. She has his spirit, his optimism, his belief that love can fix anything." He stood up and pulled Wendy to her feet, framing her face with his hands the way he used to when they were teenagers. "And knowing that Jake wanted me to take care of you both doesn't make my feelings for you any less real. If anything, it makes me more certain that this is right, that we're supposed to be together. Jake knew us both better than we knew ourselves. He knew that what you and I had was the kind of love that doesn't just disappear, even when life pulls you in different directions. But what if you're only staying because you feel obligated to Jake?" Wendy asked, voicing her deepest fear. "Then Jake was even smarter than I thought," Dom said with a smile that was both heartbroken and hopeful, "because he knew that the best way to ensure I'd never leave you again was to give me not just the woman I've always loved, but a daughter who carries the best parts of the friend I've missed every day for 15 years. He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise, while the fireflies danced around them and the porch swing creaked gently in the evening breeze. And for the first time since she'd started her story, Wendy smiled. The kind of smile that suggested she was finally beginning to believe that love really could conquer everything, even the complicated ghosts of the past. Chapter 7. Honoring. A friend, Dom, barely slept that night. He lay in his hotel bed staring at the ceiling, his mind churning with memories of Jake and questions about the future. By dawn, he had made a decision that felt both terrifying and absolutely right. He needed to visit Jake. The Millbrook Cemetery sat on a gentle hill overlooking the town, its weathered headstones and ancient oak trees creating a peaceful sanctuary that had witnessed generations of goodbyes. Dom had been here many times as a child, for his grandfather's funeral, for Memorial Day services, for the quiet moments when life felt too big and complicated for a young boy to understand. But he'd never been here looking for his best friend. The cemetery office directed him to the newer section, where military headstones stood in neat rows, marking the resting places of heroes who had come home to stay. Dom found Jake's grave beneath a young maple tree, its leaves just beginning to turn the brilliant orange and red of early autumn. The headstone was simple black granite, engraved with Jake's name, his dates, and the words, "Beloved father and friend." Someone, Wendy, Dom realized, had been here recently. Fresh daisies sat in a small vase beside the headstone, and a child's drawing was carefully protected in a plastic sleeve weighted down with a smooth river rock. Dom knelt beside the grave, his throat tight with emotion. The drawing was unmistakably Daisy's work, a stick-figure family of 3 standing in front of a house with "I love you, Daddy," written in careful 7-year-old letters across the top. "Hey, Jake," Dom said quietly, feeling slightly foolish but needing to say the words out loud. "I know this is weird talking to you like this, but I didn't know where else to start." A gentle breeze rustled the maple leaves overhead, and Dom could almost imagine it was Jake's laughter, the same easy chuckle that used to punctuate their conversations about everything from baseball statistics to their dreams for the future. "I found them," Dom continued. "Wendy and Daisy. Actually, Daisy found me, which is probably exactly how you would have planned it. That kid has your stubbornness and your complete confidence that everything will work out if you just try hard enough." Dom reached out and touched the edge of Daisy's drawing, thinking about the little girl who talked to her father's picture every night and left him artwork to make sure he knew about all the important things happening in her life. Wendy told me what you wrote on the back of that picture, Dom said, about taking care of them if something happened to you. "I need you to know that I'm not here because I feel obligated, Jake. I'm here because I love them both, and because I finally understand what you figured out before any of us, that some things are meant to be, even when the timing seems all wrong." Dom pulled the photograph from his wallet, the one Jake had inscribed with such faith in their friendship. In the morning light, Jake's handwriting looked exactly as Dom remembered. Messy and urgent, like he'd always been in such a hurry to get his thoughts down on paper before they escaped. "I was angry for a long time," Dom admitted. "Angry at Wendy for leaving, angry at myself for not fighting harder to find her, angry at life for being so complicated and unfair. But I think I understand now that some stories take longer to tell than we expect. Maybe you and Wendy needed each other for that time in your lives. Maybe Daisy needed to exist before Wendy and I could find our way back to each other." A young couple walked past, carrying flowers, deep in quiet conversation, and Dom waited until they were out of earshot before continuing. "She's incredible, Jake. Daisy, I mean. She's got your optimism and your absolute conviction that problems can be solved if you just approach them from the right angle. She's also got your complete lack of patience for adults who make things more complicated than they need to be. Yesterday she told me that grown-ups think too much, and that's why they're sad all the time." Dom found himself smiling at the memory of Daisy's matter-of-fact assessment of adult emotional complexity. "But she's also got Wendy's kindness and her fierce protectiveness of the people she loves. And Jake, she misses you. She talks about you like you're this larger-than-life hero, which I guess you were to her. Wendy's done an amazing job making sure Daisy knows how much you loved her, how excited you were to be her dad." Dom's voice caught, and he had to take a moment to compose himself before continuing. "I want you to know that when I become her stepfather, I'm not trying to replace you. I could never do that, and I wouldn't want to. You'll always be her daddy, the brave soldier who loved her before she was even born. I just want to be the guy who teaches her to ride a bike and helps her with math homework and scares away any boys who aren't good enough for her when she gets older. A red cardinal landed on Jake's headstone, cocking its head and studying Dom with bright, intelligent eyes. Dom had heard that cardinals were signs from loved ones who had passed, messages of comfort and connection across the divide between life and death. He chose to believe it was true. "I'm going to ask Wendy to marry me," Dom said, the words feeling both monumental and natural. "I wanted to tell you first, to ask for your blessing, I guess. I know that's probably old-fashioned and weird, but you were my best friend, and she was the mother of your child, and it feels important to do this right." The cardinal chirped once, a clear, sweet sound that seemed almost like approval, before flying away toward the town below. "I love them, Jake. I love Wendy with the same intensity I felt when we were 17, but deeper now, more mature. I love who she's become, the strength she's shown, the way she's raised your daughter to be confident and kind. And I love Daisy like she's already mine, like she's been mine all along." Dom stood up, brushing dirt from his knees and taking one last look at the headstone that marked his friend's final resting place. "I promise I'll take care of them," he said solemnly. "I promise I'll love them both enough for all of us. And I promise I'll make sure Daisy always knows about her daddy, who loved her so much, he wanted to name her after something beautiful and strong." Dom spent the rest of the morning driving around Millbrook, visiting places that held memories of his friendship with Jake, the baseball field where they'd spent countless summer afternoons, the creek where they'd gone fishing when they were supposed to be in algebra class, the abandoned barn where they'd practiced guitar and talked about girls and dreamed about the adventures they'd have after graduation. At each stop, Dom found himself remembering not just the good times, but the challenges Jake had faced, how his family had struggled financially, how he'd worked part-time jobs throughout high school to help pay the bills, how he'd been uncertain about his future, worried that he wasn't smart enough for college or strong enough for the military. Dom realized now that Jake's decision to join the army had been about more than just finding direction in his life. It had been about proving to himself that he was capable of something important, something that mattered, and from what Wendy had told him, Jake had found that purpose in serving his country and in becoming a father. By the time Dom returned to Wendy's house that afternoon, he felt a sense of peace about Jake's role in their story. His friend had lived a good life, even if it had been too short. He'd loved deeply and been deeply loved in return. And in his final act of friendship, he'd ensured that the people he cared about most would find their way to each other. Wendy was in the backyard when Dom arrived, hanging laundry on the line that stretched between two ancient elm trees. She was wearing a sundress the color of summer sky, and her hair was caught up in a loose bun that revealed the graceful curve of her neck. She looked beautiful and domestic, and exactly like the future Dom wanted to spend the rest of his life building. "How are you?" she asked as he approached, her voice careful and concerned. "You look like you've been thinking hard about something." "I went to see Jake," Dom said simply. Wendy's hands stilled on the sheet she was hanging. "How did you know? Where to find him? Cemetery office? I hope that's okay. I needed to, I don't know. Talk to him, I guess. Work through some things." Wendy nodded, understanding immediately. "Daisy and I go every Sunday after church. She brings him pictures she's drawn during the week and tells him about what's happening at school. Sometimes she gets frustrated because he doesn't answer back, but I tell her that love doesn't stop just because someone goes to heaven." "Smart kid," Dom said, thinking about the drawing he'd seen by Jake's headstone. "What did you talk to him about?" Wendy asked softly. Dom reached for her hands, noting the way her fingers automatically intertwined with his, as if they'd been designed to fit together. "I told him that I love you," Dom said. "Both of you. And I asked for his blessing to marry you, if you'll have me." Wendy's eyes widened, and Dom saw hope and fear warring in her expression. "Dom, are you sure? Really, truly sure?" Because once we do this, once we become a family, there's no going back. Daisy will love you with everything she has, and if you ever change your mind—" "I won't," Dom interrupted gently. "Wendy, I've spent 15 years trying to find something that could fill the space you left in my heart. Nothing worked because nothing else was you. And now I find out that not only do I get you back, but I get to help raise Jake's daughter, a little girl who's already stolen my heart completely." He pulled her closer until they were standing chest to chest in the dappled sunlight filtering through the elm leaves. "I'm not asking you to marry me because Jake wanted me to take care of you," Dom continued. "I'm asking because I can't imagine my life without you and Daisy in it. I'm asking because I want to wake up every morning to your smile and go to sleep. Every night, knowing you're both safe and happy. I'm asking because I want to be the one who fixes things when they break and celebrates when good things happen and holds you both when life gets scary." Tears were streaming down Wendy's face now, but she was smiling through them. "I'm asking," Dom said, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a small velvet box, "because 15 years ago we made promises to each other that got interrupted by life, and I'd like to finish making those promises now." He opened the box to reveal a simple solitaire diamond ring, classic and elegant and perfect for the woman who had always preferred beauty over flashiness. "Wendy Miller Walker," he said, dropping to one knee right there in the backyard where Daisy's treehouse waited to be rebuilt. "Will you marry me? Will you let me love you and Daisy for the rest of my life? Will you help me be the kind of family Jake dreamed of for his daughter?" Wendy was crying too hard to speak, but she nodded frantically, holding out her left hand with a trembling smile. Dom slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting 15 years for this moment. As he stood up and took her in his arms, the sound of the school bus rumbling down their street announced that their daughter was coming home. "Should we tell her together?" Dom asked, and Wendy's face lit up at his use of the word "our." "Together," she agreed, just as Daisy came racing around the side of the house, her backpack bouncing and her face flushed with excitement. "Mama, Mr. Dom, guess what happened at school today?" she called, then stopped short as she noticed their tear-streaked faces and clasped hands. "Why are you crying? Is everything okay?" "Everything's perfect, sweetheart," Wendy said, kneeling down to Daisy's level. "Dom has something very important to ask you." Dom knelt beside Wendy, his heart hammering as he looked into Daisy's serious brown eyes. Jake's eyes, he realized now. "Daisy," he said, "how would you feel about me becoming your official dad? Mama and I want to get married, but only if it's okay with you." For a moment, Daisy just stared at them, her expression unreadable. Then her face broke into the biggest smile Dom had ever seen, and she launched herself into his arms with such force that he nearly toppled backward. "I knew it!" she shouted, her voice muffled against his shoulder. "I knew my plan would work. I'm the best matchmaker in the whole world." And as Dom held his future daughter, while his fiancée laughed through happy tears, he sent up a silent thank you to Jake for giving him the greatest gift of all, a second chance at the family he'd always dreamed of having. Chapter 8. Building a Family. The 2 months following Dom's proposal were a whirlwind of wedding planning, treehouse construction, and the delicate dance of blending their lives into something that felt natural and right. Dom had officially relocated his architectural practice to Millbrook, setting up an office in the renovated carriage house behind Clara's property. The community center project had been approved unanimously by the town council, partly due to Dom's excellent design, but mostly because the entire town was charmed by the love story that had brought their prodigal son home. Every morning, Dom woke up in his room at the Millbrook Inn and walked the 3 blocks to Wendy and Daisy's house, where he'd find coffee already brewing and 2 of his favorite people getting ready to start their day. The routine felt so natural that sometimes Dom forgot they weren't already married, weren't already the family they were all working so hard to become. On a crisp Saturday morning in late October, Dom arrived to find Daisy in the backyard wearing overalls and a tool belt that was comically large for her small frame, surveying the treehouse project with the seriousness of a construction foreman. "Good morning, boss," Dom said, saluting her formally. "What's on the agenda today?" "Today we install the rope ladder and test the safety of the whole structure," Daisy announced, consulting the clipboard where she'd been keeping meticulous notes about their progress. "And then, if everything passes inspection, we can officially open the treehouse for business." Over the past month, what had started as a simple repair project had evolved into a complete treehouse renovation. Dom and Daisy had reinforced the platform, built proper safety railings, installed a waterproof roof, and even added a pulley system for hauling up tea party supplies. The result was a structure that would have made any child in Millbrook wildly jealous, and any parent completely confident in its safety. "Has our inspector arrived yet?" Dom asked, referring to the building inspector who had volunteered to give the treehouse an official safety certification, partly as a favor to Dom, but mostly because he was as charmed by Daisy's determination as everyone else in town seemed. "To be, Mr. Peterson's coming at 11, Daisy said, checking her plastic watch with the concentration of someone coordinating a major construction project. "That gives us 2 hours to finish everything and clean up so it looks professional." Dom bit back a smile at her serious tone. Working on the tree house with Daisy had been one of the most rewarding experiences of his life. She was a surprisingly capable assistant, eager to learn about tools and building techniques, and she approached every challenge with the kind of optimism that made even the most frustrating setbacks feel like minor inconveniences. "Where's your mom?" Dom asked, noting Wendy's absence from their usual morning routine. "She went to the store to get stuff for the celebration lunch," Daisy explained. "She said if the treehouse passes inspection, we're having a party to celebrate, with cake and everything." "Speaking of your mom," Dom said carefully, settling onto the bench he'd built beneath the elm tree. "I wanted to talk to you about something important." Daisy immediately set down her clipboard and gave him her full attention, her expression shifting to the serious look she wore whenever adults wanted to discuss important things. "The wedding is next month," Dom continued, "and after your mum and I get married, we'll all be living together in this house as a real family. I wanted to make sure you understand what that means and to ask you how you're feeling about all the changes." Daisy considered this question with the thoughtfulness of someone far older than her 7 years. "Will you still come have breakfast with us every morning?" "Every morning," Dom promised, "except I won't have to leave and go back to the hotel. I'll be here when you wake up and here when you go to bed. And will you still help me with homework and read me stories?" "Absolutely. In fact, I was hoping you might want to pick out some new books for us to read together, maybe some longer stories that we can read a chapter of each night." Daisy's eyes lit up at this suggestion. "Like Harry Potter? Emma Richardson's big sister is reading those, and she says they're about magic and friendship and being brave." "Harry Potter sounds perfect," Dom agreed. "We'll start with the first one right after the wedding." "Dom," Daisy said suddenly, her voice dropping to a more serious tone, "when you become my official dad, will you love me the same as if I was really yours?" The question hit Dom like a physical blow. He knelt down in front of Daisy, taking her small hands in his much larger ones. "Daisy, listen to me," he said. "You are really mine. Maybe not by blood, but by choice. And that's stronger than anything else. Family is about loving people and sticking with them no matter what." Daisy nodded solemnly, but Dom could see she needed more. "Your dad, your first dad, was my best friend," Dom continued. "He was one of the best people I ever knew. I'm proud. You're his daughter, but that doesn't make you any less my daughter too. My heart is big enough for both. So you'll love me and my daddy." "I'll love you both," Dom confirmed. And I'll make sure you always know stories about your daddy, and we'll visit him together, and you can talk to me about missing him anytime you want." Daisy threw her arms around Dom's neck in one of her enthusiastic hugs. "I love you, Dom, and I'm really, really glad you're going to be my dad." "I love you too, sweetheart," Dom said, his voice thick with emotion, "more than you could possibly imagine." The treehouse passed inspection with flying colors, much to Daisy's delight and only slight surprise. She had approached the entire project with such methodical attention to safety that Mr. Peterson declared it the most structurally sound treehouse in the county and suggested that Dom consider a career in playground design if architecture ever got boring. The celebration lunch turned into an impromptu neighborhood gathering as word spread about the treehouse's completion. Ruby arrived with sandwiches from the diner. Mrs. Henderson brought homemade cookies, and half the families on Maple Street showed up with their children, all eager to see the marvel that Dom and Daisy had created. Dom stood in the backyard watching Daisy give guided tours of her treehouse to a group of admiring children, explaining the safety features and the pulley system with the pride of someone who had been intimately involved in every aspect of the construction. She was, Dom realized, a natural leader, confident without being bossy, inclusive without being pushy, and generous with credit for everyone who had helped with the project. "She's going to be an architect," Wendy said, appearing at his elbow, "with a plate of Ruby's famous apple pie, or an engineer, or possibly the first 7-year-old to run for mayor of Millbrook. She'd win in a landslide," Dom said, accepting the pie gratefully. "Have you seen the way the adults in this town respond to her? She's got more natural charisma than most politicians." "She gets that from Jake," Wendy said softly. "He could walk into a room full of strangers and have them all laughing and sharing their life stories within 5 minutes. People just gravitated toward him." Dom had noticed the way Wendy talked about Jake more openly now, sharing memories and stories without the careful hesitation that had marked her earlier references to Daisy's father. It was healthy, Dom thought, this growing ability to honor Jake's memory while building their new life together. "I have something for you," Wendy said, reaching into her jacket pocket and pulling out a small wrapped package. "An early wedding present." Dom opened the package to find a silver picture frame containing a photograph he'd never seen before. It showed him and Jake at their high school graduation, both wearing caps and gowns and grinning at the camera. Between them, with his arms around both their waists, stood Wendy in her graduation dress, her face radiant with joy and hope for the future. "I found it in one of Clara's albums," Wendy explained. "I thought you should have it for your office, or wherever you'd like to put it. A reminder that some friendships transcend everything, even time and death and complicated love stories." Dom studied the photograph, remembering that day with perfect clarity now. They'd been so young, so certain that the world was full of possibilities and that nothing could ever separate them from the people they loved. In a way, they'd been right. It had just taken longer than any of them had expected. "It's perfect," Dom said, kissing Wendy's temple. "Thank you." "Dom!" Daisy's voice called from the treehouse platform. "Come up here. You have to see how cool everything looks from up here." Dom climbed the rope ladder they'd installed that morning, pulling himself up onto the platform that he and Daisy had spent weeks perfecting. The view from the treehouse was spectacular. You could see most of Millbrook spread out below, from the church steeple to the high school football field to the lake where he and Wendy had rekindled their love. "This is going to be the best tea and party location ever," Daisy declared, settling onto the cushioned bench they'd built along one wall. "I can invite my whole class, and we can pretend we're princesses in a castle tower." "Or pirates in a ship's crow's nest," Dom suggested. "Or astronauts in a space station," Daisy added, warming to the game. "Or architects surveying a job site," Dom said, making Daisy giggle. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the party continue below them. Wendy was laughing at something Ruby had said, her face bright with happiness. The autumn sunlight caught the diamond on her engagement ring, sending tiny rainbows dancing across the treehouse walls. "Dom," Daisy said suddenly, "do you think my daddy can see us from heaven?" Dom considered the question seriously, thinking about his conversation at Jake's grave and the cardinal that had seemed to offer its blessing. "I think he can," Dom said, finally. "And I think he's really proud of you and really happy that your mum found someone who loves you both the way you deserve to be loved." Daisy nodded, apparently satisfied with this answer. "I think so too. Sometimes when I'm really quiet, I can almost hear him telling me that everything's going to be okay." "Everything is going to be okay," Dom agreed, pulling Daisy close for a hug. "Better than okay, it's going to be wonderful." That evening, after the neighbors had gone home and the treehouse celebration had wound down, Dom helped Wendy clean up, while Daisy played with the new tea set that Mrs. Henderson had given her as a treehouse warming present. "She's been different since you've been here," Wendy said as they loaded the dishwasher together. "More confident, more settled. Having a father figure in her life has made such a difference." "She's made a difference in my life too," Dom said. "I never realized how much I wanted to be someone's dad until I met her. She makes me want to be the kind of man who deserves that trust." "You already are," Wendy said, reaching up to cup his face in her soapy hands. "Jake knew what he was doing when he wrote that note. He knew you'd love us both exactly the way we needed to be loved." As if summoned by the mention of her father, Daisy appeared in the kitchen doorway, wearing her pajamas and carrying the stuffed rabbit that had been her bedtime companion since she was a baby. "Time for stories," she asked hopefully. "Time for stories," Dom agreed, lifting her onto his shoulders for the ride upstairs to her bedroom. Daisy's room was a perfect reflection of her personality, bright and cheerful, with butterfly stickers on the walls and books scattered across every available surface. The bed was covered with stuffed animals and the artwork she'd created over the years, including several pictures of the three of them as a family. As Dom tucked her in, and Wendy arranged her stuffed animals in their precise bedtime positions, Dom realized that this was what happiness felt like. Not the dramatic, overwhelming emotion he'd expected, but this quiet sense of rightness, this feeling of being exactly where he belonged. "Will you tell me a story about when you and Mama were kids?" Daisy asked, settling under her covers with her rabbit tucked securely in her arms. Dom glanced at Wendy, who nodded encouragingly. "Once upon a time," Dom began, "there was a boy and a girl who met in high school and became best friends. They used to sit by a beautiful lake and make plans for all the adventures they'd have together when they grew up." As Dom told their story, edited for 7-year-old sensibilities but true in all the ways that mattered, he watched Daisy's eyes grow heavy with sleep. When he reached the part about the little girl who brought them back together, Daisy smiled sleepily. "That's me," she whispered. "I'm the little girl in the story." "You're the most important part of the story," Dom said softly. "The part that makes everything else make sense." Within minutes, Daisy was asleep, her breathing deep and even. Dom and Wendy stood by her bedside for a moment, watching her peaceful face in the soft glow of her nightlight. "Ready to be a full-time dad?" Wendy asked quietly as they made their way downstairs. "I've been ready since the moment she asked me to marry her mother," Dom said, making Wendy laugh. "I think you mean since the moment I accepted your proposal?" "No," Dom said, pulling her into his arms in the living room where Clara's furniture mixed with their new additions to create something that felt like home. "I mean since the moment a 7-year-old girl decided I was exactly what her family needed. She knew before any of us did that this was meant to be." "Smart kid," Wendy said, echoing Dom's words from weeks earlier. "Smart kid," Dom agreed, and kissed his fiancée under the same roof where their daughter slept peacefully upstairs, dreaming of tea parties in tree houses and the family that loved her enough to make all her wishes come true. Chapter 9. Love letters never sent. 3 weeks before their wedding, Wendy stood in Clara's attic surrounded by decades of carefully preserved memories. Afternoon sun slanted through the small window, illuminating dust motes that danced in golden light as she sorted through boxes that had been untouched since Clara's death. Dom was downstairs with Daisy, helping her practice walking down the aisle with the perfect flower girl pace. Slow enough that everyone can see how pretty you look, but not so slow that people fall asleep, as Daisy had explained it. Their laughter drifted up through the floorboards, mixing with the sound of wedding march music that Daisy was humming slightly off-key. Wendy had volunteered for attic duty, partly to give Dom and Daisy time to bond over wedding preparations, but mostly because she needed a few quiet moments to process the enormity of what was about to happen. In 3 weeks, she would marry the love of her life in front of their friends and family. In 3 weeks, Daisy would officially have the father she'd been wishing for. In 3 weeks, they would finally be the family that 15-year-old Wendy had dreamed about during those long summer nights by Miller's Lake. "Focus, Wendy," she murmured to herself, turning back to the task at hand. Clara had been a sentimental pack rat, saving everything from church programs to grocery lists, and Wendy was trying to sort the meaningful keepsakes from the clutter. Before they moved Dom's things into the house permanently, she'd already found treasures: Clara's recipe box, filled with handwritten cards for all of Wendy's favorite childhood meals, photo albums chronicling Wendy's childhood years before the accident that took her parents, and Clara's journal entries about raising a grieving 12-year-old who rarely smiled and never talked about her feelings. The box in the far corner, wedged behind Clara's old Christmas decorations, almost escaped Wendy's notice entirely. It was smaller than the others, made of plain brown cardboard with Wendy's letters written in Clara's careful cursive across the top. Wendy didn't remember any letters, but she pulled the box toward her and lifted the lid with curiosity. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper yellow with age, were dozens of envelopes addressed in her own handwriting. Her breath caught as she lifted the first one out, recognizing immediately the careful script she'd perfected as a teenager. The envelope was addressed to Dom Barton, with his family's old address on Elm Street, but it had never been mailed. There was no postmark, no stamp, just her hopeful 17-year-old handwriting spelling out the name of the boy she'd loved and lost. With trembling hands, Wendy opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. The paper was soft with age, and the ink had faded slightly, but her words were still clear. "Dear Dom, it's been 3 weeks since we left Millbrook, and I miss you so much it feels like there's a hole in my chest where my heart used to be. I keep starting to tell you things, like how the desert sunsets here are beautiful but not as beautiful as the way the light looked on your face that last night by the lake, and then I remember that you're not here to tell. I know you must be angry with me for leaving without explaining. I know you must think I didn't love you enough to stay, but Dom, I loved you too much to ask you to give up your future for mine. Grandma Clara needs me now, and I don't know for how long. It could be months or years or the rest of her life. How could I ask you to wait for someone who might never be free to love you the way you deserve? I hope you're applying to those colleges like you planned. I hope you're still playing football and making everyone laugh with your terrible jokes. I hope you find someone who can love you better than I did. Someone who won't leave you wondering and waiting and hoping for things that might never happen. But mostly, I hope you know that leaving you was the hardest thing I've ever done, and that I'll love you until the day I die. Forever yours, even when I can't be. Wendy. Wendy's hands shook as she set the letter aside and reached for another envelope. This one was dated 6 months later. Dear Dom, I found out today that you got the scholarship to Stanford. Mrs. Rodriguez at the grocery store has a sister who still lives in Millbrook, and she heard it from Ruby at the diner. I'm so proud of You and so happy that you're getting the chance you deserve. I also heard that you're dating Jessica Miller. No relation to me despite the last name. She's beautiful and smart and everything you deserve. It breaks my heart, but it also makes me glad. You shouldn't spend your life waiting for someone who can't give you what you need. Grandma Clara is doing better. She can walk a few steps with a walker now, and her speech is much clearer. The doctors say her progress is remarkable, but they still can't tell me when or if she'll be independent enough for me to have my own life again. I got my GED, and I'm taking some college classes online. Pre-nursing, because I want to help people the way the nurses here have helped us. I think about you every day, but I'm trying to build something good out of the mess my life became. Love always, Wendy. Letter after letter revealed the story of her years away, her struggles with loneliness and responsibility, her small victories and crushing setbacks, her constant love for the boy she'd left behind. She'd written to him when Clara had her first major setback, when Wendy had gotten accepted to nursing school, when she'd met Jake and felt guilty for finding comfort with someone else. One letter, dated just after Daisy's birth, made Wendy cry. Dear Dom, I had a baby girl today. Her father was killed before she was born, and I'm scared and alone and overwhelmed by how much I already love her. I named her Daisy because her father said if we had a daughter, he wanted to name her after something beautiful and strong. I wish you could meet her, Dom. I wish you could see her perfect little fingers and the way she makes these tiny sighs when she sleeps. I wish we were 18 and married like we planned, and this was our baby, and you were here to hold my hand and tell me everything's going to be okay. But that's not the story we got to tell. I hope you're happy, wherever you are. I hope you've found love and success and all the things you dreamed about. I hope you're not still thinking about the girl who broke your heart when you were 17. I'll always love you, even though I know I gave up the right to say that when I left. Wendy. The final letter in the box was dated just 6 months ago, shortly after Clara's death. Dear Dom, Grandma Clara died yesterday, peacefully, in her sleep the way she wanted. I'm back in Millbrook now, living in her house with Daisy, trying to figure out what comes next. I drove past your old house today, but there's a different family living there now, Mrs. Henderson. At the inn, said your parents moved to California years ago, but she didn't know anything about you. Part of me wants to try to find you, but another part of me thinks maybe it's better this way. We're different people now, and too much time has passed, and you probably have a wife and children and a life that doesn't have room for ghosts from high school. But if you're reading this somehow, if these letters ever find their way to you, I want you to know that you were the best part of my youth, and that losing you has been the greatest regret of my life. I want you to know that I never stopped loving you, not for a single day in 15 years. If I could do it over again, I would find a way to tell you the truth before I left. I would trust you to understand that sometimes love means making impossible choices. I would trust us to find a way through anything together. I hope you're happy, Dom. You deserve every good thing life has to offer. All my love, always, Wendy. Mama? Daisy's voice came from the bottom of the attic stairs. Dom wants to know if you want some lemonade. He says you've been up there forever and you're probably getting thirsty. I'll be right down, sweetheart, Wendy called back, hastily wiping the tears from her cheeks. She gathered the letters back into their box, her heart pounding with the magnitude of what she'd discovered. For 15 years, she'd poured her heart out to Dom in letters she'd never sent, letters that Clara had somehow found and saved. As she climbed down from the attic, Wendy wondered what Clara had been thinking when she'd hidden those letters away. Had she hoped that someday Wendy would find them? Had she known that Dom would eventually come back into their lives? She found Dom and Daisy in the kitchen, sharing a plate of cookies and debating the merits of different flowers for the wedding. "Bouquet!" Dom looked up as she entered, and his expression immediately shifted to concern. "Hey, you've been crying," he said, standing up and crossing to her. "What's wrong? Did you find something upsetting up there?" "Not upsetting," Wendy said, holding up the box of letters. "Surprising and maybe a little overwhelming." "What is it?" Daisy asked, abandoning her cookie to investigate. "Letters," Wendy said simply. "Letters I wrote to Dom over the years but never sent. Clara saved them all." Dom's eyes widened. "Letters to me?" Wendy nodded, suddenly feeling shy and vulnerable. 15 years worth. Every major event in my life, every time I missed you, every time I wondered what might have been if I'd stayed. I poured my heart out to you in writing, even though and thought you'd never read the words. "Can I?" Dom started, then stopped, looking uncertain. "I want you to read them," Wendy said, holding out the box. "All of them. I want you to understand that you were never forgotten, never replaced. You were always the love of my life, even when I couldn't tell you." Dom accepted the box with reverent hands, as if he were holding something precious and fragile. "Wendy, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Wendy said. "Just know that every day we were apart, I was writing you love letters in my heart. Clara just happened to save the ones I actually put on paper." Daisy, who had been listening to this exchange with the fascination of someone witnessing a real-life fairy tale, suddenly clapped her hands together. "This is so romantic," she declared. "It's like the movies where the people love each other but can't be together, except now you can be together, and you have proof that you never stopped loving each other." Dom laughed, the sound mixing relief and joy and wonder. "When you put it like that, it does sound pretty romantic." "Can we read them together?" Wendy asked. "Tonight, after Daisy goes to bed? I want to share them with you, but I also want to remember what it felt like to write them." "I'd like that," Dom said softly. "I'd like that very much." That evening, after Daisy had been tucked in with extra bedtime stories to make up for the day's emotional revelations, Dom and Wendy curled up together on Clara's old sofa and read through 15 years of one-sided correspondence. With each letter, Dom understood more fully the depth of Wendy's sacrifice and the constancy of her love. With each letter, Wendy relived the journey that had brought her back to this moment, this man, this chance at the happiness she'd never stopped believing they deserved. "I wish I'd known," Dom said when they'd finished reading the final letter. "Not because it would have changed anything about the choices we had to make, but because it would have made the waiting easier, knowing that somewhere out there you were missing me as much as I was missing you." "Maybe that's why Clara saved them," Wendy said, settling more deeply into Dom's arms. "Maybe she knew that someday we'd need proof that real love doesn't just disappear, even when everything else falls apart." "Smart woman," Dom said, pressing a kiss to the top of Wendy's head. "The smartest," Wendy agreed. "She always said that the best love stories were the ones that took a lifetime to tell." As they sat together in the quiet house, surrounded by the evidence of a love that had survived 15 years of separation, Dom realized that their story was finally ready for its happy ending, and it was going to be even better than anything they'd dreamed when they were 17. Chapter 10. Coming Home. 3 weeks later, on a perfect May morning, Wendy stood in Clara's bedroom putting the finishing touches on her wedding dress. The ivory silk gown with delicate lace sleeves had belonged to Clara, altered to fit perfectly. "You look like a princess, Mama," Daisy said, arranging flowers in her hair. In her pale yellow dress, she looked ready for her dual role as maid of honor and flower girl. "Are you ready for this? Ready to officially become a Barton?" Wendy asked. Daisy's face lit up. "I've been ready since the day I met Dom in the diner." A soft knock interrupted them. "Ladies, your chariot awaits," came Ruby's voice. "And the groom is pacing holes in the grass. The ceremony was held at their special spot, by Miller's Lake, behind the willow tree where they'd carved their initials as teenagers. Dom had transformed the setting with white chairs facing the lake, an archway of birch branches and roses, and fairy lights in the willow branches. About 50 guests were assembled: Mrs. Henderson, Ruby, the mayor, Wendy's nursing colleagues, and Dom's clients. The most important guest was represented by an empty chair, draped with military dress blues, and holding a white rose. Daisy had insisted on leaving a place for her father. As Pachelbel's canon began, Daisy started her careful walk down the path, distributing flower petals with mathematical precision and waving at guests. When the music shifted to the wedding march, Wendy began her walk down the aisle. She'd chosen to walk alone, but she felt surrounded by love, Clara's presence, her parents' memory, and Jake's blessing. Dom stood at the altar with tears streaming down his face, looking at her like she was the answer to every prayer. "Dearly beloved," Pastor Williams began, "we gather to witness the marriage of Dom and Wendy, two souls who have found their way back to each other." The vows were simple and heartfelt. Dom promised to love Wendy with teenage intensity but adult wisdom. Wendy promised to trust him with her heart and daughter. "Dom, do you take Wendy to be your wife?" "I do," Dom said clearly. "I absolutely do." "Wendy, do you take Dom to be your husband?" "I do," Wendy said. "And Daisy, do you accept Dom as your father?" "I do," Daisy said enthusiastically, "and I promise to teach him about girl stuff." "Dom, do you accept Daisy as your daughter?" "I do," Dom said, kneeling to her level. "I promise to love you like you're my own because you are. By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife and daughter. Dom, you may kiss." "Your bride." As they kissed, guests erupted in cheers. But the loudest came from Daisy, who threw her remaining petals and declared, "I told you my plan would work." The reception in Clara's backyard was magical, with twinkling lights and Ruby's catering. Dom and Wendy's first dance was to "At Last" by Etta James. "No regrets?" Dom asked. "Only that it took us 15 years, Wendy said. "I don't regret it," Dom replied. "All of it brought us here, and we wouldn't have Daisy." Later that evening, the three of them sat on the dock at Miller's Lake, feet dangling in the water. "Tell me the story again," Daisy said sleepily. "Once upon a time," Dom began, "there was a boy and a girl who fell in love by this lake. They had to wait a very long time to keep their promises. But they never stopped loving each other," Daisy added. "Never," Wendy confirmed. "And then I came along and fixed everything," Daisy said. "You made everything make sense," Dom said. "You were the missing piece." As they watched stars reflect on the water, Wendy thought about their journey. It hadn't been the story she'd planned at 17. It had been harder, more complicated, but it had also been more beautiful than anything she could have dreamed. "I love you both," she said quietly. "More than all the stars in the sky." "More than all the fish in the lake," Daisy added. "More than all the love letters in the world," Dom said. As they made their way back to the house, their home, Wendy realized that some love stories really do have fairy tale endings. They just need a 7-year-old matchmaker to help them find their way to happily ever after. In the distance, a cardinal called from the willow tree. Dom squeezed Wendy's hand, both of them thinking of Jake, and knowing that somehow he was smiling down on the family he'd helped create through love that transcends everything.